Welcome to Podcasting Podcasts. We summarize the best American podcasts so you don't have to listen to them all.
That's right.
So today we're diving deep into a really interesting one. It's
Oh, yeah, I know this one. This is the Tucker Carlson one.
yeah, with Dr. Mark Hyman. It's called Everything You're Eating is Toxic, and Big Pharma likes it that way.
I love that title. It gets you right in the mood, doesn't it?
It does. It's a bit provocative, but, let's see where they go with this.
Okay, well, right away, they hit you with a pretty big stat. 11 million deaths a year.
11 million.
Yeah, are linked to diet. They're saying food has actually overtaken smoking as the #1 global killer.
Whoa, okay, hold on. So, more people are dying from what they eat than from smoking.
That's what they're saying, yeah. Pretty crazy to think about, right?
Yeah, that's huge. So what's Dr. Hyman's take on this? Why are we all suddenly dropping dead from food?
Well, his main argument is that it's all about the rise of ultra-processed foods.
Ultra-processed foods.
They make up a huge part of the American diet now, 67%.
67%.
Yeah, that's 2/3 of what we're all eating.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but honestly, I feel like sometimes processed is just buzzword. What makes these foods so different from, say, a loaf of bread from the bakery?
Well, it's all about the degree of processing. Think
Yeah.
about those government-subsidized crops, corn, soy, wheat. Ultra-processed foods take these, they break them down to their molecules in factories, and then they reassemble them
Oh, wow.
with a bunch of chemicals into something that's, designed to last forever on the shelf.
Right.
And be super appealing.
It's like that healthy-looking granola bar in my pantry could actually be part of the problem.
Potentially, yeah. These foods are basically engineered to hijack our biology. There was this study, they found that people unknowingly ate 500 more calories per day on an ultra-processed diet
500 more calories a day.
compared to whole foods. Yeah, that's a potential weight gain of 52 pounds in a year.
52 pounds. That's insane.
Yeah.
But doesn't that also tap into the whole idea that obesity is about personal choice? We should all just have more willpower.
Right, that's the common argument. But Dr. Hyman, he pushes back hard on that. He argues that, the food environment plays a massive role. He tells this story about a family in South Carolina, and they're battling obesity and diabetes. They live in what he calls a food desert. So it's fast food and convenience stores everywhere, but fresh produce is hard to find.
Oh, yeah.
And expensive.
So even if they wanted to eat better, the system's making it really tough.
Exactly.
But then there's also the argument that, people need to have some choice, even if it's not ideal. And that, taking away options isn't necessarily the answer.
That's definitely a complex issue. There are multiple perspectives there for sure.
Yeah.
But Dr. Hyman's point is that it's not just about willpower, Studies show that 14% of adults and 12% of children, they actually meet the criteria for food addiction.
Whoa, hold on. Food addiction.
Yeah, as measured by the Yale Food Addiction Scale. That's comparable to rates of alcoholism. It's crazy. These foods are literally designed to hook us.
Wow. That's pretty disturbing. Makes you think twice about what you grab at the grocery store.
Yeah, right. And then there's the whole idea of the true cost of cheap food, what we're actually paying for beyond the price tag.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. What exactly are we paying for?
So the Rockefeller Foundation did a report, and they said that every dollar that we spend on food results in $3 of collateral damage.
Collateral damage. What does that even mean? That sounds intense.
It's mostly healthcare expenses and lost productivity because of diet-related illnesses. It's we might save a few bucks at checkout,
Right.
but then later we're paying big time through medical bills and missed work.
So it's we're being penny wise and pound foolish with our health, basically.
Exactly. And it gets even crazier. Taxpayer dollars actually subsidize the foods that are making us sick. Think about this. SNAP benefits, food stamps can be used to buy soda.
Soda. You mean something with zero nutritional value?
Yep.
That's linked to so many health problems. How does that even make sense?
Well, it's a system with some serious conflicts of interest. Get this. 20% of Coca-Cola's profits, they come from SNAP benefits.
Whoa, that is
Yeah.
wild. It's like a rigged game or something.
Yeah.
And I guess this all brings us to the link between, what we eat and the explosion of chronic diseases.
Right. Dr. Hyman really dives into the science connecting our diet to things like cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, autoimmune disorders.
So it's not just about weight, but a whole cascade of potential health issues. What are some of the most surprising connections he makes?
Well, one that really stood out to me was the role of sugar in fueling cancer cell growth. It's not just sugary drinks, it's like the hidden sugar in all these processed foods we're talking about. And here's a really mind-blowing part. 93% of Americans are considered metabolically broken.
93%? What does that even mean? Are you saying almost all of us are walking around with, like, some undiagnosed issue?
Basically, yeah. It means our bodies aren't functioning as well as they should. Think of it like, your car engine running rough. You might not have a breakdown yet, but things are off,
Yeah.
And it's often a precursor to more serious health problems down the road.
So even if we feel okay now, there might be something bubbling beneath the surface.
Yeah, exactly. And it's often fueled by those same culprits. Sugar, ultra-processed foods, and just a lack of real nutrients. The research shows that even seemingly healthy foods, their nutritional value has declined.
Yeah.
Like broccoli today has 50% fewer nutrients than it did 50 years ago.
Wow. That is a huge difference. So even when we're trying to make good choices, it feels like the system is working against us.
Yeah, it really highlights how important it is to understand what's going on with our food and how it impacts our health, on such a fundamental level.
It's a lot to digest. It almost feels like we're being set up to fail in a way.
I know it can feel that way, but the first step to changing things is understanding the problem. That's what makes this conversation so important.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem. The stats are pretty alarming. But Dr. Hyman also offers some potential solutions, right? He calls for a medical awakening.
He does, yeah. He believes that we need to completely rethink how we approach health in America.
Okay, so before we get into that, what are some of the things that have stood out to you so far?
Well, you mentioned feeling overwhelmed, right? And I think that's a really common reaction when we start to see how deeply these issues run. But Dr. Hyman says it's not about, going to extremes overnight. He's more about finding a sustainable way of eating that nourishes your body and makes you feel your best. He believes even small changes can make a big difference.
Okay, that's reassuring. I was starting to think I needed to become some kind of, health guru overnight.
Yeah.
So what are some of those small things we can do, on a personal level?
Well, he talks a lot about becoming informed consumers, reading labels carefully, questioning those marketing claims, and really educating ourselves on the impact different foods have on our bodies. It's about taking back some control.
That makes sense. It's so easy to fall into that trap of, believing those healthy labels without really understanding what's in the food.
Totally. And it's not just about individual effort, Dr. Hyman emphasizes the power of collective action, too. He encourages, supporting organizations that are fighting for food system reform, advocating for policy changes.
Oh, yeah.
Voting with our dollars, too, by supporting companies that prioritize health and sustainability.
He also mentions a 10-day detox program that he created to help people, reset their metabolism and break free from food addiction. I'm curious, have you tried anything like that?
I haven't done his specific program, but I've definitely become a lot more mindful about reading labels, choosing whole foods over processed options. I've also significantly cut back on sugar.
Oh, wow.
Which has made a noticeable difference in my energy levels, for sure.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I've been trying to cut back on soda, and even just that one small change has made me feel less sluggish.
Yeah.
But okay, you mentioned policy changes. What are some of the concrete things Dr. Hyman suggests?
Well, he proposes reforming the NIH to prioritize nutrition research. And he wants to mandate nutrition education in medical schools.
So doctors should actually be equipped to advise their patients on using food as medicine.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a great point. If doctors aren't trained in nutrition, how can they effectively guide their patients toward healthier choices, right?
Exactly, right. He also advocates for supporting farmers transitioning to regenerative agriculture, which is, a much more sustainable and holistic approach to food production.
I've heard that term, regenerative agriculture, but honestly, I'm a little fuzzy on what that actually is.
Well, it basically focuses on practices that improve soil health, increase biodiversity, and enhance ecosystems. Essentially, it's about working with nature, not against it.
Okay, so instead of depleting the soil with chemicals and monoculture farming, we're building it up and creating a more resilient and healthy system.
Exactly. And that translates into more nutrient-dense food, which is something we desperately need given the decline in nutritional value we discussed earlier.
Yeah. It's such a fascinating solution because it addresses so many problems at once. What else is on Dr. Hyman's, policy wish list?
Well, he's a big proponent of clear front-of-package labeling. Imagine something like those warning labels on cigarettes, but for unhealthy food.
Whoa, that's a bold idea. it would certainly make people think twice before grabbing that bag of chips.
It's about transparency and informed consent. Just like with medications, we have a right to know what we're putting in our bodies and the potential consequences.
But what about that argument that, people should be free to make their own choices, even if those choices aren't the healthiest?
That's a valid point, and it often comes up in these discussions. But Dr. Hyman's point is that right now, those choices aren't truly free. We're being manipulated by an industry that prioritizes profit over health.
Right. And he actually mentioned some pretty shocking examples of, like, how the food industry has misled consumers and influenced policy to, protect their bottom line.
Oh, yeah. Remember how the FDA allows products to claim no trans fats, even if they still contain a certain amount per serving? It's all about loopholes and clever wording, designed to, deceive consumers.
It is. And what about that example of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia backing out of supporting a soda tax after they received a large donation from Coca-Cola?
Oh, that was a real eye-opener. It shows just how deep these conflicts of interest run, and how challenging it can be to, enact meaningful change when powerful industries are pulling the strings.
It's pretty disheartening to, realize the extent to which our choices are being manipulated. But I suppose knowledge is power.
Absolutely. By understanding these tactics, we can start to, see through the marketing and make choices that truly align with our values.
So he also talked about how the food industry specifically targets, heavy users of unhealthy products, essentially exploiting people who are already struggling.
Right. Instead of promoting moderation, or healthy alternatives, they double down on what they know will hook people.
Right.
Particularly those most vulnerable to these addictive qualities. It raises some serious ethical questions about corporate responsibility.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to see why Dr. Hyman believes a medical awakening is necessary. He even mentions, medical schools are failing to provide adequate nutrition education.
Right. He talked about how many doctors are just ill-equipped to advise their patients on using food as medicine, simply because they haven't received proper training in nutrition.
That's crazy. So we have doctors prescribing medications for conditions that could potentially be prevented or even reversed through dietary changes.
Right.
That seems like a major disconnect.
It is. It highlights the need for, a paradigm shift in how we approach health. We need to move away from this reactive, symptom-focused model and embrace a more proactive, preventative approach.
Yeah, for sure. And he seemed especially frustrated with the lack of research and funding dedicated to alternative treatments, especially those focused on lifestyle interventions like diet and exercise.
Yes, he cited several studies demonstrating the effectiveness of dietary changes in reversing conditions like diabetes, heart disease, even Alzheimer's.
Wow.
But, these findings often get overshadowed by the push for pharmaceutical solutions.
It's like we're so focused on finding that magic pill that we've forgotten about the power of our own bodies to, heal and thrive.
Right, exactly. And it's not just about individual health. He brought up the concept of reimbursement-based medicine, right? Pointing out that doctors are often incentivized to prescribe drugs.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than recommend lifestyle changes, because that's what the system rewards.
So we're stuck in a system that prioritizes profits over prevention. That's a sobering thought.
It's definitely challenging. But Dr. Hyman believes change is possible if enough people demand it. He pointed to other countries that have successfully implemented policies to, promote healthier choices.
Okay, that gives me some hope. So what can we as individuals do to start making a difference?
He stresses the importance of, making informed choices at the grocery store, supporting local farmers markets, and advocating for policy changes in our communities. But he also emphasizes the need for a personal commitment to healthy habits.
Like eating more whole foods, cutting back on processed foods and sugar, getting regular exercise, prioritizing sleep.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of our health and creating a lifestyle that supports our well-being.
But what about those of us who, struggle with food addiction? It almost feels like we're fighting an uphill battle against our own biology.
He doesn't shy away from the reality of food addiction. He talks about how these ultra-processed foods, they're designed to hijack our brain chemistry, making us crave more and more.
He actually compared it to the tactics used by, big tobacco, creating products that are deliberately engineered to be addictive.
Right. He argues that the food industry uses similar strategies, targeting our vulnerabilities, exploiting our biological cravings.
It's pretty disturbing when you think about it. Makes you wonder how much of our eating habits are truly driven by our own choices versus manipulation by, powerful corporations.
It's a really important question to consider, and it highlights the need for greater awareness, and critical thinking when it comes to the messages we're bombarded with daily.
He shares some pretty compelling insights into, how our food choices impact not just our physical health, but also our mental health.
Right. He highlights the link between sugar consumption and increased anger and aggression.
Wow, really?
And he also talks about how inflammation, often driven by a poor diet, can contribute to conditions like depression, anxiety, and even schizophrenia.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying what we eat can actually impact our mood and mental state?
Absolutely. He even mentioned a Harvard psychiatrist who had success treating patients with schizophrenia using a ketogenic diet.
That is fascinating. It really challenges, conventional thinking about mental health. And it underscores, the interconnectedness of our physical and emotional well-being.
Right. He described the ketogenic diet as a way to, activate the brain's repair systems and improve cognitive function.
So by switching our bodies from burning sugar to burning fat for fuel, we can essentially, rewire our metabolism and reduce inflammation, which has a positive knock-on effect on our brains.
Exactly. It's amazing how something as simple as changing what we eat can have such a profound impact on our, mental clarity and emotional stability.
That's incredible. It really makes you realize how much power we have to shape our own health and well-being.
Totally. He also talked about how our bodies go through a natural detoxification process when we reduce our intake of sugar and processed foods.
Detoxification. So what does that look like? Are we talking about juice cleanses and colonics?
Not necessarily. He said people might experience a few days of, feeling unwell as their bodies adjust.
Oh, okay.
But that this is usually followed by a surge in energy, reduced cravings, and improved mental clarity.
So it's like hitting the reset button on our health. But how do we even know where to start?
Yeah.
There's so much conflicting information out there about what's healthy and what's not.
He talks about the importance of tuning out the noise, and focusing on what your body is telling you.
Right, yeah.
Pay attention to how you feel after eating certain foods. Do you feel energized or sluggish? Do you have cravings?
Right.
Or do you feel satisfied?
That's actually really helpful advice because it takes the focus away from all the external rules and puts it back on what feels right for our own bodies.
Exactly. And he stressed that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. What works for one person might not work for another. It's about finding what feels good for you and makes you feel your best.
Yeah, that's empowering. It puts us back in the driver's seat when it comes to our own health.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our agency and making choices that align with our own well-being, not the agenda of the food industry.
So where do we go from here? What are some of the first steps we can take to start making these changes in our lives?
Well, he suggested starting with small, manageable changes.
Like swapping out that sugary cereal for a protein-rich breakfast.
Exactly. Or packing a healthy lunch instead of relying on fast food. And maybe choosing to cook at home more often instead of ordering takeout.
Those are all great ideas. I'm starting to feel inspired to make some changes in my own life.
That's great to hear. And remember, even small steps can make a big difference over time.
Yeah. This conversation has been, it's been eye-opening. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on the food we eat and how it impacts our lives.
Me too. What were some of the key takeaways that resonated with you? It's amazing how much ground we covered, just in this one deep dive.
I know, right?
From food deserts and food addiction to the complexities of vaccine science, and even just the very definition of what constitutes food.
Yeah. It's a lot to process, but I think it highlights how important this conversation is.
Absolutely. These are issues that impact every single one of us, on a daily basis.
It really makes you think twice about, everything you put in your shopping cart.
Right. And it's not just about individual choices, it's about understanding the larger systems at play, the policies, the marketing, the way our entire food environment is structured.
It feels like we're up against a lot.
It's definitely a complex issue. But Dr. Hyman offers some really concrete steps we can take, both individually and collectively, to start making a difference.
Okay, I'm ready for some actionable advice. What can we do?
Well, first and foremost, he emphasizes the importance of education.
Education?
Yeah, empowering ourselves with knowledge. He's a big advocate for nutrition education, both for medical professionals and for the general public.
So doctors should be better equipped to advise their patients on diet and nutrition. And we should all be more informed consumers, right?
Exactly. Knowledge is power, right? If people understand what they're eating and how it impacts their health, they can start making more informed choices.
Makes sense.
He also stresses demanding transparency from food manufacturers.
Transparency.
Like when it comes to labeling and ingredient lists.
Okay, yeah.
Remember his rule of thumb, if you can't pronounce it, don't eat it.
Uh-huh.
It's such a simple but powerful guideline, It really puts the power back into the hands of the consumer.
I love that. So education, transparency, what else?
He talks a lot about the impact of government procurement practices. Like if those billions of dollars spent on food for schools, the military, other institutions were shifted towards healthier options.
Oh, I see.
That would send a huge ripple effect throughout the entire food system.
So instead of serving processed, prepackaged meals in schools, we'd be prioritizing fresh, nutritious food.
Exactly. And that could transform children's relationships with food, setting them up for a lifetime of healthy habits.
It's such a powerful idea. But I also keep thinking back to that story Dr. Hyman shared about the family in South Carolina, battling obesity and diabetes in a food desert. It just highlighted how hard it is to make healthy choices when you're surrounded by unhealthy options.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that access to healthy food is a social justice issue. We can't talk about creating a healthier society without addressing these systemic inequities.
Absolutely. And we also can't ignore the influence of, lobbying efforts by the food industry. Dr. Hyman shared some pretty disturbing examples of how they've used their money and power to block meaningful change.
Right. It's a reminder that we need to stay vigilant, and hold these corporations accountable. Our health and well-being shouldn't take a backseat to corporate profits.
Agreed. And the whole discussion about, the vaccine debate and the blanket immunity granted to vaccine manufacturers, it also brought up some really important ethical questions.
It's definitely a complex issue, but I think Dr. Hyman made a really strong case for, informed consent in healthcare and greater transparency when it comes to potential side effects.
Right. And he highlighted how inconsistent our system is,
Yeah.
right? Like some industries get shielded from liability while others are subject to, strict regulations and lawsuits. It makes you wonder who really bears the burden of risk in our society.
It's a lot to think about. But even with all the challenges, I think Dr. Hyman's message is ultimately one of empowerment, not defeat.
Sorry about that.
We have more power than we realize to shape our own health and create a better future.
Yeah. So it's not about waiting for someone else to fix the system. It's about, taking ownership, educating ourselves, and making conscious choices every day.
Exactly. It's about demanding transparency, advocating for change, and supporting organizations that align with our values.
This deep dive has been a real wake-up call for me. I feel inspired to learn more and explore some of these solutions Dr. Hyman presented. What about you? What are you thinking?
Yeah. Lots to think about for sure. It's been a wild ride, right?
It really has. It's amazing how much ground we covered, from food deserts and food addiction to the complexities of vaccine science, and even, what even is food these days, right?
Yeah, we really went there. We went deep into the ultra-processed food problem, those hidden costs of our so-called cheap food. And that mind-blowing stat, 93% of Americans are metabolically broken.
Yeah, that one's still swirling around in my head. It's almost like a hidden epidemic, right? Impacting almost everyone, even people who might consider themselves healthy.
Right, and the ripple effects are huge. We've talked about how this impacts national security, the economy, the health of the environment, even the future of our planet. It's all connected.
Food really is at the center of everything, isn't it? But where do we go from here? Dr. Hyman calls for this medical awakening. It sounds inspiring, but how do we translate that vision into real change?
Well, he offers some concrete policy changes, like reforming the NIH to prioritize nutrition research.
Right.
And shifting those agricultural subsidies away from, these big factory farms and towards more regenerative farming practices. But these are big systemic shifts that require collective action and, political will.
Right. But he also talks about the power we have as individuals, too.
Yeah.
He's a big advocate for nutrition education.
Yeah.
For, both medical professionals and the general public.
Oh, absolutely. Knowledge is power, right? If people actually understand what they're eating and how it impacts their health, they can start making more informed choices.
Totally. And he's a big proponent of us all demanding more transparency from food manufacturers.
Right.
Especially when it comes to labeling and ingredient lists. Remember his rule of thumb?
Oh, yeah.
If you can't pronounce it, don't eat it.
It's so simple, but so powerful. It really puts the power back in the hands of the consumer.
I love that. And we also can't forget the impact of government procurement practices, right?
Mm.
Like imagine if those billions of dollars that are spent on food for schools, the military, other institutions, if they were shifted towards healthier options,
That would be huge.
it would send such a ripple effect through the whole food system.
Absolutely. Imagine if schools actually served like fresh, nutritious meals instead of those highly processed, prepackaged options.
Right. It could totally transform kids' relationships with food, set them up for a lifetime of healthy habits.
Totally.
That story that Dr. Hyman shared about the family in South Carolina, it really stuck with me. It highlighted how hard it is to make healthy choices when you live in a food desert.
Totally. It's a stark reminder that access to healthy food is a social justice issue. You know, we can't talk about a healthier society without addressing those systemic inequities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also can't ignore the influence of lobbying efforts by the food industry, right?
Mhm.
Dr. Hyman shared some pretty disturbing examples of how they've, used their money and power to try to block meaningful change.
It happens all the time. It's a good reminder that we need to stay vigilant and hold these corporations accountable. Our health and well-being shouldn't take a backseat to their profit.
Right, totally agree. The whole discussion about the vaccine debate and the blanket immunity granted to vaccine manufacturers, that also brought up some really important ethical questions, didn't it?
It's definitely a complex issue that deserves careful consideration and, open dialogue. But I think Dr. Hyman made a really strong case for, informed consent in healthcare and for greater transparency when it comes to potential side effects.
Yeah, and he highlighted how inconsistent our system is, right? Like some industries get shielded from liability, while others are subject to strict regulations and lawsuits. It makes you wonder who really bears the burden of risk.
Those are all good questions. But even with all the challenges, I think Dr. Hyman's message is ultimately one of, empowerment, not defeat.
Yeah, I like that.
We have a lot more power than we realize to shape our own health and create a better future.
It's not about waiting for someone else to fix the system. It's about taking ownership, educating ourselves, making conscious choices every day.
Absolutely. Demanding transparency, advocating for change, and supporting organizations that align with our values.
This deep dive has been a real wake-up call. And I feel, inspired to learn more and to explore some of the solutions Dr. Hyman presented.
Me too. I think we all have a role to play in creating a healthier future,
Yeah. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep.
We'll see you then.